The years 1914 through 1918. The world as known then was changing. Years of conflict and hostilities between the European nations steadily came to a head, with each meeting being worse than the last. It was only a matter of time before the powder keg of war was set alight, and the world became embroiled in a great war, more commonly known today as World War I. As with any martial conflict, weapons and tactics were the order of the day. And coming on the heels of the first major industrial revolution, advances in technology helped push the arms of both sides to new, more destructive heights. We will be examining these advances, as well as the methods of warfare during World War I, so that we can see exactly how one side prevailed over the other. Again, with the influence of the Industrial Revolution, World War I saw the rise of newly developed weapons and new strategies to implement and combat them. Though there were some differences between the arms of both the Allied and Central Powers, at the same time there were great similarities as well, and the generalities of these weapons led to the advent of a new combat strategy, trench warfare. Devised as a way to defend against the hail of enemy fire, trench warfare only served to make battle conditions more brutal. Charges against the enemy trenches were nearly always futile efforts, as if the onslaught of artillery and guns wasn't enough. The trenches were often outlined with barbed wire, the no man's land in the middle peppered with landmines. And then there would be fighting in the trenches. Daggers, maces, and clubs were all used to fend off invaders. In particular, the German soldiers were fond of the trench knife, designed specifically for confined spaces like trenches. Of course, the main weapon in any modern war was the gun, and in World War I, a new form of firearm was introduced, the machine gun. Fully automatic, machine guns could be carried or mounted, firing rounds much faster than anything before. For instance, the Allies favored the Colt Browning machine gun, affectionately known as the potato digger, which could unleash a staggering 450 rounds per minute. It was considered the premier gas-operated machine gun in service up until the United States joined the war, and was supplanted by the Lewis automatic. This gun was superior to the Colt Browning, enough so that it was used all the way up to the Korean War. In regards to extremely long-range combat, artillery was effective and destructive. The British brought to the table the 9.2-inch Mark I. Introduced into the battlefield on October 1914, this massive weapon weighed 15 tons and fired shells 131 kilometers high. Not to be outdone, the German Krupp company countered with the Big Bertha, which weighed in at 43 tons and had a 12-kilometer firing range. With such armament at their disposal, every day was a long one for the poor soldiers, who had to live under the near constant threat of death from above. But being pinned to one spot simply would not do. Ground had to be gained, deadlock broken. This is where tanks came into play, used to traverse the no man's land with more protection and firepower. The British referred to them as landships, and deployed the first Mark I for testing in September 1915, the first tank used in combat. 2 years later, this was followed by the Germans' AB-7. Only 20 were produced, however, due to poor designs. Not all combat happened on land. World War I saw the development of submarines, U-boats as they were called by the Germans that created them, and they were a decisive weapon when it came to maritime warfare. U-boats first saw action in the Battle of the Atlantic, where they were able to dominate normal vessels twice their size with ease. The submarines gave the Germans a critical edge in the water. And it wasn't only the sea that saw combat. Airplanes started coming into their own during this war, no longer only used for reconnaissance missions. Machine guns were mounted on the front of the planes, and the practice of dogfighting soon began. One of the most notable fighter pilots of the time was the Wehr Baron, known as the Aces of Aces. He had approximately 80 victories at the end of his career. He was a national hero in Germany, and likewise awed and feared by others during the war. But back on solid ground, another kind of weapon was doing more damage than anything else, if not in quantity, then in gruesome quality. Chemical warfare, a precursor of sorts to the biological warfare sometimes mentioned today, was another way of dealing with clearing the enemy trenches. The Germans were one of the first to use chemical weapons, by way of the chemical Zyazol bromide. Later on, they switched to the more effective mustard gas. Whatever the type, it worked out the same. Gas bombs would be launched into enemy trenches, where unsuspecting soldiers would breathe it in and succumb to its debilitating and ghastly effects. Surprisingly, however, due to the dangers of chemical attacks and the subsequent issuing of gas masks to soldiers, the death toll by this method were surprisingly low. Taking all the previous information in mind, it's no wonder why one of the most pivotal battles of World War I, the Battle of Amiens, went in favor of the Allies. The Germans had put up a valiant effort until then, but the superior air force and the use of armored cars kept the German force from rallying effectively. What's more, the unknown positions of the Allied forces, thanks to fog, kept gas attacks from being launched. In the end, it was more the morale and psychological aspect that broke the seemingly eternal stalemate of the war. However, superior weaponry and the tactics of the Allies played a huge hand in winning the Great War.